Hey there, everyone. How are you all doing? Thanks for stopping by on another episode of Storytime. I've got quite the episode for all of you, with 10 brand new experiences. Today's stories consist of some middle of nowhere stories, a story from studying in Spain, and even a strange occurrence at a store. But yeah, with that, my friends, let's get started with these stories, and I'll talk to you a little bit later. Number 1. This was something that happened about 10 years ago when I was living in a small town outside of Nelson, Canada. I was 18 years old at the time, and I was looking for a place to work now that I graduated from high school. Luckily for me, my dad was friends with somebody who was looking to hire some new employees. He owned an electronics store. It didn't take too long, but after a fairly simple interview that literally consisted of a couple of questions, I was hired. Right away, I got along with my fellow coworkers, who we'll call Jason and Maria. We connected on our interest in movies and even video games. They were nice, and the job there was fairly simple, even if that meant we rarely got any customers. Looking back, I'm surprised the store lasted that long, considering we barely got anybody. Still, that didn't stop the loyal customers from stopping by and grabbing the things they wanted. I soon became familiar with the customers until one day he started showing up. It all started pretty normally until eventually I became aware of some odd things. Okay, so I can recall one afternoon I was the only one working, and I was at the front desk on my phone messaging my friend. I don't remember exactly what it was we were talking about, but I'm pretty sure it was just your average talk. I want to say it was around 5 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon when all of a sudden this guy showed up. As a side note, we closed early on Sundays at 6 p.m., and up until that point, nobody had shown up since 1. Either way, I welcomed him into the store and he proceeded to look around. Right away, though, I felt something was weird. For starters, he never said anything when I welcomed him in, which is fine, but he just kept his hands in his jacket and never once looked up to me. Speaking of jackets, he was wearing an older looking rain jacket with dark pants and matching boots. It would have been normal if it were cold, but it was at least 85 degrees, not exactly something I would expect. Well, as he was walking around, he was soon out of my eyesight as he appeared to move to the back of the store. I kept an eye on him through the monitor next to me, and now he appeared to just stand still and stare down the aisle through the shelves. I did find it weird, but I started to realize that he'd been looking at me the entire time, not so much the electronics. Pretty weird, and I started to get a little bit nervous. This was when I called my boss and I told him about what was happening. He was actually about 20 minutes away from the shop, so he would soon join me. I tried to act normal since he hadn't really been doing much else, and finally I watched as he started heading towards one of the back rooms. That's where he attempted to open it. This door was locked and you had to use a key card to open it. He kept trying to open the door, and this is when I finally got up to tell him that he needed to leave. "I'm sorry, sir, but that area is for employees only. I'm going to need you to leave since we're about to close the store." At first, he didn't say anything. He just stood there with a confused look on his face. Finally, after what seemed like 30 seconds, he says, "Wow, really? I didn't know that. I thought this was the exit to leave the store. My bad." I mean, really? There wasn't even an exit sign back there. And besides, it was locked, and it even said employees only. Whatever. He finally leaves, and my boss shows up, and we proceed to close. Since I thought perhaps that stranger was just confused or something, I never did mention it to my boss. That was just the first occurrence with him. It was only going to get worse. Over the series of the next couple of days, there would be often times I would be alone at the store, and that same guy would show up. Each and every time he arrived, he would be wearing the same thing. He would just do the same thing over and over. You see, he would just stand there for minutes at a time, staring off into the distance, before just leaving without saying a word. In his time doing this, he would show up at random points of the day, and I would see him looking through the window. Any time I would look up at him, he would just run off into the parking lot, and that would be that. One afternoon, it was the same thing, but my friend Maria was working with me on this night. The regular customers had been showing up, and all was going well. Suddenly, me and Maria started hearing what sounded like yelling towards the end of the store. We now noticed it was the same stranger guy. He was yelling at this younger couple, apparently saying that they were in his way. This time around, we called the security guard who works nearby and he was able to get him to leave. Finally, we told my boss about it, and he said we can call officers. After all, we did have him on camera. They took our information and they said they would be on a lookout. It's funny, because as soon as that happened, he seemed to have disappeared. That was until one night. This time around, it was me and Jason at the store and we were about to close. Up until this point, it'd been a month since my last encounter with a stranger, and I'd finally put it in my distant memory. Also, I'm now the assistant manager, so I had a few more things I had to take care of. So Jason leaves about 15 minutes before me, and I was left to do some final paperwork in the back office. All of a sudden, I was able to hear the alarm go off in the store, and that's when I knew something was going on. Immediately, I turned off the lamp from my desk, and now I take a look through the monitor. It was hard to tell at first, but I was able to see a series of spotlights as they're now making their way around the store, and even so, I am able to hear things being tossed around. From the monitor, I was able to see what looked to be a group of 3 people. They're putting things in backpacks, and they're filling them up with all the electronics we had out. iPods, laptops, you name it. I remember I sat there frozen in the back office, not knowing what to expect. After all, my only exit was right in front of me, through the locked door, that unless you had a key for, you couldn't get inside. Well, I started to finally relax, telling myself, okay, calm down. Even if they are taking things from the store, there's no way they can get into the back room. After all, you have the only key. That's when I reached for my key and I realized I'd made a mistake. Turns out I left my key at the front desk where I was working earlier. So even though I could leave, if they found the key, they could be the ones to open the door. Thankfully, they never did find it, but I was now stuck, thinking that at any moment they were going to find the key. Luckily, though, our alarm is set to call officers anytime it goes off, so I knew they would be here at any moment. Even so, I called Jason, explaining everything that was going on. Jason, are you there? Where are you? What's wrong? You sound really worried. Is everything okay? No, it's not. There's somebody inside the store and I'm stuck in the back room. Okay, don't worry, I'm on the way. I'll be there as fast as I can, so hang on. I guess the people inside must have heard me because I could suddenly hear knocking on the door. Hey, I recognize that voice. You're the one that works in the afternoons, aren't you? If you know what's good for you, you'll open the door now. I recognize the voice as well, and it belonged to that stranger from a month ago. I yelled out, reminding him that help was on the way, but that didn't stop them from trying to open the door. Finally, they ended up leaving, and soon, the store was left with nothing but the sound of the alarms. After another few minutes, Jason arrived along with the help, and I remember running outside crying. I, of course, gave them all the descriptions I could, and after a few days, they were found. It was definitely a summer job I wouldn't forget anytime soon. By the way, even though I'm almost 30 years old, I still talk to Jason and Maria, even if we are hundreds of miles apart. Number 2. I've had quite a bit of wild encounters in my life, but perhaps the one that really got to me the most was when I was studying in Spain. I'm currently 25 years old, but this happened about 7 years ago when I was 18. You see, for some information on myself, I'm originally from California. I grew up in San Jose, where I went to school there pretty much all my life. One thing I wanted to do was take the opportunity to study abroad in Europe. I'd always been fascinated with the old world, so to speak. The people, the buildings, the festivities, and especially the food. That's why in my junior year of high school, I was looking at different places I could go and study at. France, Belgium, England, just to name a few of them. Well, after a year of deciding, I ended up choosing to go study in Spain. That's where I would spend my next 4 years, getting my degree in music. I always fancied myself a musician, and I remember all the nights I would stay up playing violin. I still play it in case you're wondering. Even though I did spend 4 years studying there, I would be welcomed in with quite the surprising encounter in my first semester. So, let's fast forward to when I first arrived. I ended up getting a dorm room with a couple of other students who were also in the study abroad program, and in this program, we were each assigned a counselor who would help us out. They spoke Spanish and they taught us the basics we would need, things like getting around town and getting around school. One good thing is I'd actually studied Spanish in high school for 2 years, so I already knew some. Still, it was nice to finally have an excuse to practice it. So the semester started off and everybody else pretty much became busy. My roommates Dorothy and Abby were always busy, and apart from meeting me back at the dorm, we rarely saw each other throughout the night. So, let's talk about one of these nights, shall we? It was a Friday, and I remember it being about a month after the semester had begun. My fellow college students should know this time of the semester. It's that point when your first midterms are starting, and you're now just starting to study at night. This actually happened to be one of those nights. Like I mentioned, it was a Friday night, and while my roommates were out on the other side of town, I was at a nearby coffee shop studying. I had grown to love this place because of the pastries, but that's not important. It seemed that I've lost track of time because before I knew it, the shop had slowly began to empty, and now the barista that was serving coffee was telling me they would be closing in about 20 minutes. This put us at around 11 p.m. at night. Now, before you question me on why I chose to walk around by myself at night, I should explain that this area was rather safe. As far as I knew, I never heard about anything happening here, and it wasn't uncommon to see students walking around this late. As I was about to leave, I noticed my roommates Dorothy and Abby messaged me. Hey there, can you believe me and Abby lost the key to the dorm? Do you mind opening the door so we can get inside? It's really cold out here. See, our dorm building was the kind where you had to use a key to open any doors. This way, the only people who could get inside would be the students and the faculty. I explained to them that I was at the nearby coffee shop and I told them I'd be there in about 20 minutes. Well, I hadn't realized how cold it was, and I figured that I didn't want to keep them waiting. Therefore, I decided to take a shortcut. During the daytime, there's an alleyway that me and my roommates sometimes take, and it cuts about 10 minutes of a walk. I told myself since it was a faster way to get back to campus, I could do the same thing now. Big mistake. So as I said goodnight to the barista, I now started to make my way down the street. Seems that on this night, everybody had chosen to stay back at their rooms. The once fun and exciting sidewalk full of college students was now just this empty street with empty street lamps. After about 5 minutes of walking, I reached the street that features the alleyway, and now I start making my way down, heading towards campus. I'm not even in there for about 30 seconds, until I start hearing sounds in the distance. To top it off, it's now starting to rain. Seriously, it felt like I was in a movie or something. So, to describe this alleyway, it's just this narrow straight path, with some routes that lead you to some of the shops and nearby apartments. This created certain sections where somebody could easily be hiding and waiting for you. I mentioned this because when I reached the halfway point, the sounds started to get louder. I was now hearing what sounded like whispering, too. I quickly turned around, and I was able to catch at the last second somebody jump into one of the dark corners of the alleyway. I stood there for a few seconds looking around, but I don't see anything. I now proceed to continue, thinking I was just imagining things. It's now I call my friends, telling them where I was, and I tell them to meet me at the end of the alleyway entrance. They don't waste any time, because literally as I'm reaching the exit, there they were, yelling and shouting at me. At first I couldn't really tell what they were saying, but as I got closer, I heard one word: run. That was when I looked around me, and I could see somebody in a dark hoodie. I now make a mad dash towards my friends, and we make it back to the dorm room. Once we were inside, we told campus security about it, but they couldn't find him. They did find him about a week later, though. Looking back and thinking about it, I wonder how long he'd been in there and what exactly he had on him. Abby told me that as I reached the end of the alleyway, he appeared to reach out to me. That was when he saw my friends, and I guess he second-guessed the idea. You can imagine we avoided that area, and nothing like that happened to us again. We eventually graduated and moved on with our lives, and I'm now living back at home where I'm teaching violin at a local college. Number 3. Just a week ago, me and my cousins decided to go on a 3-day weekend trip to our family's private vacation home. The home was located out on a private section of the beach that my family owned. There were other rooms out there, but they were all empty, just leaving me and my cousins. That's why we found what happened so weird. For some context, the downtown area was about 20 minutes away from us, so though we weren't too far from town, you never did expect to see anyone to arrive, especially considering this area was fenced off. In this story, I'll refer to my cousins as Cynthia and Joseph. Cynthia was my age, and Joseph was a few years older than us, being 22 years old. The reason we had decided to go out to the summer home was we hadn't seen each other in over 2 years. The last time we'd seen each other was a couple of years ago when we were staying at a hotel in Florida. Now that we're on winter break, we figured we could go spend some time together and take time to relax. Yes, I know going to a beach house in the wintertime isn't exactly what you would expect, but at the same time, we wanted to be able to get away from everybody and be the only ones out there. Little did we know what would be awaiting us. Since the house sat empty, we made sure to stop by the downtown and pick up all the food we needed. Since my parents gave me an allowance, I was able to buy all the snacks I wanted, and I even rented a few video games that we would take along with us. So, getting to the home is an interesting experience in itself. Once you leave the downtown area, you proceed to drive down these winding back roads that go by a few cliffs that are right next to the ocean. It's a really beautiful view that we always enjoyed seeing, but you still had to be careful when driving here. You see, since the roads are so narrow, you have to be careful when making turns, otherwise you could fall into the water. Once you've gone down these roads for a while, you reach a part of the road that you can take to get to the private beach. That's where our home was located. Anyways, the first 2 nights there were pretty normal. We spent the majority of the time playing video games and enjoying some time by the water. At night, we would have a barbecue and make all the food we had brought with us. Really, it was just a great time. On Saturday evening, we were all asleep, and I remember getting up at 3 in the morning to get some water. As I made my way over to the kitchen, I noticed the light on the back porch suddenly come on. You see, there was a window that gave you a perfect view of our back porch. There, you could see the ocean and even see if somebody was walking out there. That's what I believe I was seeing, as I slowly made my way over to the window, and when I looked outside, I was able to see what looked to be a shadow of somebody walking to the other side of the house. I did find it weird, but I ended up ignoring it, blaming it on my over-imagination. The next morning, I ended up mentioning it to my cousins, but they told me they'd been asleep all night, and they hadn't heard or seen anything. Okay, well, when we stepped outside to head out to town, we each noticed muddy footprints that appeared to make their way around the house. This is when I started thinking about the noises from the other night, and I started putting things together. I think my cousins were realizing it, but as not to ruin our fun vacation, we just ignored it. We go into town and go about our day, and we return at around 7 p.m. We were leaving tomorrow morning, so we made sure not to stay out too late. After dinner, we all ended up going to bed at around 9 p.m., but for some reason, I had trouble sleeping that night, so I sat outside on the back porch, reading a book I had brought with me. It was around midnight by this point. As I'm reading, I can hear Cynthia calling out to me from inside the house. Turns out she couldn't sleep because she kept complaining about hearing noises on the window outside her room. This is when we both carefully made our way around the house, but we don't see anything. We do end up laughing about it and telling ourselves that we were overreacting to nothing. Now we decided to walk down by the water and get our minds off of everything. This is when it started to happen. We're talking away, enjoying the sounds of the waves, when we started to notice some headlights going down to the beach. There was a little road that cars could take to get down here, but we knew it couldn't have been Joseph since he was asleep back at the house. We both watched as this car slowly approached where we sat, and then suddenly their headlights turned off. This was then followed by somebody stepping out of their car and making their way to us. Being that we're on this private property, we didn't know what to expect. It didn't look like an officer's vehicle, and it's not like any of the neighbors were staying at their homes. Regardless, me and Cynthia decided to head back to the home, and that's when we could hear the car starting again. We turn around and we can see this car slowly driving behind us, almost like they were playing some sort of game. Finally, we reached our home and immediately we run inside where we end up calling in about it. By the time help arrived, this person and their vehicle were already gone. That didn't mean something didn't happen. A couple of days later, we ended up getting a call from the officers nearby. Turns out that somebody had gotten inside one of the nearby homes and things were stolen. Thankfully, like I mentioned, nobody was home. It's just crazy to think that they might have gotten inside our home, but they probably didn't want anybody seeing them. Number 4. Growing up in Oklahoma, I spent most of my summers with my uncle and my aunt out in their rural farming town. Now, when I say rural, I'm not talking about your average ordinary small town with, I don't know, maybe a few thousand people. No, I'm literally talking about a living area that only featured less than 50 people. All that was here was a single long road that featured a couple of convenience stores, a spot to fill up your car, and even a post office. As I mentioned, this was a farming town, and most people stayed on their properties. If you did go into this so-called town, you would often see the same people. This is why everybody pretty much knew each other. This is a big change from living out in Norman, Oklahoma, where I was used to seeing traffic and cars. Anyways, the reason why I enjoyed going out here was it gave me a chance to visit my cousin John and also get away from my computer. There was just something so nice about being away from all your devices and going back to the basics. Oftentimes than not, me and my cousin John would spend hours running around, and at the same time, we would help out my uncle. When we weren't with him, we would spend our time in the evening and camp outside on a field that was just above the farm. From here, we had an amazing view of the farms around us and even the road. In all my time out there, I would only see maybe like 1 or 2 cars. With that said, let's fast forward to one evening a month ago, when me and John decided to go for a drive, using some of the back roads that head off into the desert. See, there was this one spot John wanted to go take me to. It's right alongside a river that also featured a small wooded area. It was around, I'd say, 30 minutes away from my uncle's farm. If you thought it was empty there, out here, it's like everybody just disappeared. Driving out there, we did see a few trailers and abandoned homes, but my cousin said that they'd been left there for years. John says that there used to be a community out here. I guess it did explain some of the weird things I did see, but I never did put those details together. Keep in mind, this area was supposed to be abandoned, at least from what I could tell. Either way, we ended up reaching this river area where we now parked. It was a nice spot, but me always being the adventurous type, I tell my cousin, "Look, as fun as it is to be here looking at the stars, don't you want to go into the woods and explore a little? Come on, let's follow the river and check it out." My cousin did look a little bit nervous about it, but after some convincing, we grabbed a small spotlight and we start making our way around. Well, it didn't take 5 minutes until we started hearing noises, the distinct sound of heavy footsteps. John then says, "Okay, I think that's enough adventure for now. Come on, let's go back to the house. I think we still have some leftover ice cream to get to." "Will you relax? Come on, it's most likely a bear or something. I'm sure it'll go away." Yeah, this area doesn't get any bears, but I was still trying to calm my cousin down. Here's where it gets bizarre. Seemingly out of nowhere, we are able to see the outline of people through the trees. As we shined our spotlights toward them, there standing looking back at us were a group of people who obviously looked like they'd lived out there. Each one appeared to be wearing matching outfits, and one of them was wearing a mask. Behind them, we could see a small campfire that they appeared to be hiding. It's weird, but it almost seemed like they were telling us to leave, even though they never did say anything. This was when we take off running back to the car and we get out of there right away. Sure, it might not be as bad as other experiences, but what really got to me and my cousin John was why they were out there in the middle of nowhere, and why were they wearing masks. Some secret meeting out in the middle of nowhere? Maybe, but still strange. As an update to the story, my cousin told me that he's seen a group of people checking out his property from afar, but he told me that so far nothing has happened. Number 5. During my first semester in college, my new roommate invited me over to a party her cousin was holding. For this story, we'll call my friend Sally, And by the way, this was around 2005. Sally told me the party was over at her cousin's house, and they said they were having a birthday party for her. We end up going to pick her up a gift, then make the 20-minute drive over to her cousin's house. The party was okay, but I got pretty bored, considering I really didn't know anyone. Thanks for leaving me at the table, Sally. Whatever. I remember getting up and heading over to the front yard to get a water bottle from the cooler. Note that at this point, nobody was in the front yard. Everybody was in the backyard. As I'm heading on over, I could hear somebody call out to me from the street. "Hey there, what are you doing out here on your own? Isn't the party inside?" He looked to be about my age and was dressed the way you would expect to see somebody at a birthday party. He seemed pretty nice, so I said hello and introduced myself. He introduced himself as Carl, and he said he was friends with the family. We ended up talking for a few minutes, and then he says, "Oh, wow, that's right, I forgot. I was supposed to bring my pet dog Jamie with me, but she's back at my apartment. Hey, I know. Do you want to go back to the apartment with me so we can go get her?" Yes, I know the first thing to do would have been to turn around and go back inside. And looking back, I know I was pretty dumb. But I end up going with him, telling myself that this would solve my boredom. Actually, I don't even know if he knew the name of the birthday girl. Yeah, I was pretty naive back then. As we're driving our way over to his home, he was talking to me about animals and even saying he has 2 dogs at his place. Wait a minute, I thought he said he only had 1. Something was definitely off here, but I still didn't pay attention to it because so far everything seemed pretty normal. "I can't wait for you to meet my pets. I know you're going to love them. But first, why don't we go get some ice cream, shall we?" Now I was becoming a little bit worried. After all, now we're going somewhere else, not where he originally said. We end up going to a Ben & Jerry's where we meet up with what I'm assuming were his friends. They appear to be a lot older than Carl. They look to be in their late 40s. They walked up to us and now they started talking about how Carl did a good job and how they would talk about his reward later that night. In the meantime, they told us they would meet up with us back at the apartment where we could have dinner and watch a movie. Something was telling me that that would be the last thing we would be doing. This is when I try to leave, but Carl stops me and says, "Come on, where do you think you're going? After all, you promised you'd go back with me to get the dogs." I nervously laughed and I told him I wanted to get a smoothie before we left. "Okay, I'll go ahead and wait for you in the car, but don't take too long. Besides, we need to get to the apartment immediately." Once Carl and the other 2 were outside, I walk up to the cashier and I started to explain what I believed was happening. I agreed to act calm, and he told me he would call his manager. In the meantime, he told me to wait in line. Waiting in that line seemed to take forever, but it's now I messaged my friend, telling her where I was and how she needed to get here now. As I'm waiting for my order, an officer walks into the store and gets in line to order some ice cream. Now was my chance. I walk on over to him, and from the window, I can see Carl and the other 2 making zero effort to stay around. I now watched as they drove away, where I never did see them again. I mean, if they weren't wanting to take me to go see the dogs, then why would they leave just like that? Something was now telling me that there was no dog to begin with. Well, my friend does show up, and I do give the officer a description, but sadly, they were never found. It's worrying to think that you hear about many of these stories, and most of the time, they don't end so well. I'm just so thankful I made it out okay. And I'll tell you, I definitely learned my lesson. Number 6. This happened a couple of weeks ago, but I still wanted to tell you all about it. So to start off, I work at a small convenience store on campus, but since it was a 3-day weekend, we really didn't get many people showing up on a Saturday. Not that I can really blame my fellow students. After all, who wants to be on campus on the weekends? Well, since it was a slow day, my boss told me and my coworker that we were free to close the store early, and that's what we did. Now I found myself back at my apartment complex, just relaxing to the sounds of the rain outside and studying. It was November, and with it getting dark at around 5 p.m., there wasn't really much to do anyways. I ended up taking a nap, and at around 7 p.m., I wake up to my dog whining. I did forget to mention, but I have a 3-year-old golden retriever named Bailey. She was honestly my best friend, and she kept me company when I was alone. I looked at the time and I figured that she was hungry, so I get up to make her favorite food. Even so, she wouldn't eat, and she kept looking at the door. Okay, well, maybe she needed to go outside or something. I get up to open the kitchen door, but she doesn't move. She just stands right between me and the door, almost like telling me not to step out there. I did find it strange, but after realizing she didn't need to go outside, I closed and locked the door, and now I proceed to go back to the living room. Here's where it gets even more weird. While watching television, Bailey kept pacing back and forth by the window and getting up to check outside. I actually didn't notice it until I got up to get something from my room. That's when I noticed my dog acting funny. She looked really distressed, and I'll admit, it was starting to worry me a little. Again, I tried to head to the door, but she just stopped me and started barking. That was when I started hearing the sounds of branches and leaves being moved around. It being fall, the field outside was full of leaves, so you could hear the sounds of footsteps. Okay, either my dog was playing games with me, or she was sensing something or someone outside. Perhaps just a small animal, I told myself. I do live by a state park, so although it's unheard of, sometimes we get bobcats or coyotes. Most of the time they're harmless enough and they're just looking for food, but that's why me and my neighbors always leave our pets inside. Over the course of the next hour, I kept hearing noises outside my window. I live on the bottom floor, by the way. I also heard what sounded like somebody going through the dumpster just outside the apartment. Still, I just told myself that it was one of the neighbors from upstairs. Finally, at around 10 p.m., it seemed Bailey couldn't hold it in anymore, as she's now scratching at the door and getting my attention. This time around, she goes running outside and she goes to her favorite spot to do her business. While doing so, I take the opportunity to head to the mailbox that was on the other side of the apartment complex. You see, I was expecting a letter from my mom with some extra money, but since I fell asleep earlier, I had forgotten about it. I arrive and I'm opening my box when suddenly I start hearing growling at the corner of the building. Where I was located, you had this series of mailboxes for the people that lived there, and right next to it, there was another hallway you could take to get to the second story. Obviously, I couldn't see what was there since the corner blinded me, but it definitely sounded like an animal. All of a sudden, I could hear Bailey barking and running toward me. I stood there listening to it for a few seconds, thinking it was Bailey, but the more I listened to it, the more it didn't sound like her. Actually, it didn't even sound like a dog. It sounded more like you would hear from a cat. And no, I'm not talking about your average ordinary cat everybody owns. My suspicions are soon answered as I looked around the corner, and there I can see something moving around in the dark hallway. I focused in on it more, and that's when I realized what it was. It wasn't the friendly neighborhood cat, but instead, I was looking right at a mountain lion. I remember standing there frozen, thinking that any sudden movement might get this thing's attention. I don't know, but standing so close to something like that really made it feel like time just froze. As I'm standing there seemingly just frozen, I hear my dog barking up a storm and running toward me. This was when the mountain lion reacted and started heading toward me. Great, thanks a lot, Bailey. Now it looks like it really is the end. Thankfully, though, it appeared the mountain lion was more worried about getting away than focusing on me, because it runs right past me and heads off into the park. I guess the sounds Bailey made were enough to frighten the large cat. I now watch as Bailey runs after it, and soon she returns back. From here, a couple of the neighbors stepped outside, obviously with a confused look on their face. After some explaining, they were just happy nothing happened to me in the end, but one of them did mention seeing a mountain lion just the other night. After that happened, we did see it every now and then, but eventually it seemed to have moved somewhere else. Number 7. You know how you're always told to never walk alone at night on your own, especially in the middle of nowhere? Well, yeah, let's just say I really didn't listen to that advice. So to give you some context, this happened back around 1997, when I was a sophomore in high school. At the time, I was staying over at a friend's house. See, anytime we had exams, I would spend the night over and study with my friend. In this story, we'll call my friend Kimberly. Me and Kimberly were close, and we pretty much were like family. That's why on this night we happened to both have the same idea. At around midnight, we both decided that we wanted to go get some hot chocolate and donuts from the nearby convenience store. As a side note, we didn't have a car yet, so in order to get to the store, we would have to walk about 20 minutes. Another thing to note is that we live in a small town in Ohio. You don't really hear about much happening here. That's why we were so confident in going on our own, even if it did mean it was late. Well, just like that, my friend grabs the key to the house and we step outside as quietly as we could. Honestly, the last thing we wanted to do was have Kimberly's mom and dad notice we were gone. I remember it being a fairly cold night and there being a light rain just beginning to form. So, with our umbrellas, we started to make the walk over. This is where we had two options. Option number one, go alongside the sidewalks with the street lamps and spend 15 minutes getting to the small store. Or option number two, go through the park in the center of town and save about 10 minutes. Option two sounded like a great plan, but the thing about the park was that it was fairly empty. Not that the sidewalks were any better, but the problem with the park was that there was barely any light, so it was hard to see. Still, we told ourselves we would be brave and decided to head into the park to save time. Big mistake. We proceeded to walk in the park, and so far, everything seemed pretty normal. And everything was pretty quiet. Aside from the rain hitting our umbrellas, there wasn't any other sound or signs of people. That was when me and Kimberly noticed something. Up ahead of us on this trail, there appeared to be somebody stumbling around back and forth. It was weird watching him. He kept walking around in circles. It almost sounded like he was talking to himself. Me and Kimberly jumped to the side of the trail, hoping that he wouldn't see us. It's not that we were assuming the worst, but something about him made us pretty nervous. The thing is, we're already halfway through the park, so we figured we can just make our way around him. That's what we end up doing. As carefully and quietly as we could, we walk alongside the trail, using the trees to sneak by him. When we're right next to him, we were able to get a better look at him. He looked really out of it that night, and it appeared that he was holding a large bottle. I guess somebody had a little too much of the good stuff. Just then, Kimberly of all times ended up tripping, causing a commotion near the trees. This seemed to get his attention, because now he's looking towards us, and he's shouting too. Me and Kimberly now take the opportunity to exit the stage, so to speak, and we start booking it toward the exit. In that moment, we can both hear a loud crashing sound, and we see a broken bottle just inches away from us. One look behind us now, we can see him chasing us with what appear to be him holding a large piece of the broken bottle. We start yelling and screaming at this point, and luckily for us, we were able to see a couple of security guards up ahead of us. Thank goodness they were there, since they were able to grab a hold of him until help arrived. So when all was said and done, we never did get our hot chocolate and donuts. Let's just say our parents weren't too happy with what we did. Either way, I'm just glad we didn't end up worse. Number 8. Before this happened, I never really had the concern of walking around at night or staying out too late. After this experience in late 2014, however, that mindset changed. My story takes place during my time in college, and at the time, I was still living at my mom and dad's place. This is where I would commute to campus on a nightly basis. You see, my schedule was like this. I worked in the mornings at a coffee shop from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Then in the evening, I would take the bus to get to school at around 5 p.m. This gave me about an hour and a half to go home and eat something. As for my school schedule, it was Monday through Thursday, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I have school until around 10:45 p.m. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem for me as I enjoyed the feeling of being out at night after school. See, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, my school would have this tradition of having these food gatherings for students, and oftentimes, I would head on over to the cafeteria to pick up some leftover burritos. Though delicious, that's not really an important detail to the story. On one of these nights, a Tuesday, I ended up staying a little bit later than usual. The writing workshop I was at actually ended a half hour earlier, but I stayed another hour since I wanted to get some writing done at the library. By the time I left campus, it was close to 11 p.m. I, of course, called my mom and dad, and I told them I'd be running a little bit later than normal. Hey Mom, just to let you know, I stayed at work to work on my paper, so I might be getting home a little bit later than normal. Did you want your dad to go pick you up? That way you don't have to walk on your own? Don't worry, Mom, I'll be fine. Besides, I love walking at nighttime. Looking back, I wish I would have taken the offer. The first part of the trip goes well. I wait at the bus stop and it arrives at around 11:25 p.m. Once on board, I'm welcomed in with a familiar bus driver, and I go and take a seat in my usual spot. 20 minutes later, we finally arrive at the bus station, and at that point, I just wanted to get home and relax after a long day of work. As I get up from my seat, I couldn't help but notice the bus station was empty, apart from one gentleman who sat at a nearby bench. From the looks of it, it appeared that he was waiting for the next bus, but then I thought about it. This was the last bus. Figuring it was just some random person, I get off the bus and I start making my way home. Now, normally I would see quite a few college students walking around, but for some reason on this night, it seemed to be quieter than usual. Either way, I walk down the familiar streets until for some reason I get this strange feeling to turn around. There, standing underneath a street lamp, was what appeared to be the man from the bus station. I instantly recognized the same jersey and dark hat he was wearing. But what was weird about this was the more I looked toward him, the more I started realizing some things. Here's what I mean. As I was walking, I kept hearing the undeniable sounds of footsteps. Of course, as this was going on, I was talking to my friend on the phone, so I didn't really think about it too much. Something was now telling me that he'd been following me for quite some time. It's just now that I realized it. I recall the phone conversation more or less going like this. I'll go ahead and call my friend, Amanda. Can you believe I actually got my paper done tonight? I know, right? And I was able to turn it in just in time. Wow, you're such a hard worker. I guess I could learn a thing or two from you. Yeah, I guess you're... Wait, what in the world? Hold on, Amanda. Wait, what's wrong? Is everything okay? No way. Amanda, stay on the line with me, okay? I think somebody's following me. Yes, I know I should have called for help instead of talking to my friend, but I chose that option instead. As I was explaining everything, I'm now walking faster, but this time when I turned around, I no longer saw him. Great. Now there is this stranger out there in the dark, and the footsteps were only getting closer. I now break into a sprint, as I can see a convenience store up ahead of me. In a low voice, I was now able to hear somebody say, "Where do you think you're going? Come on, you're perfect for me." With that last little bit of adrenaline I had left, I fly right inside this store, where the cashier was obviously a bit confused. It's now we both take a look from the inside, and he's just standing out there staring into the store. After an awkward 10 seconds of silence, he ends up just walking away. In the end, I had my dad pick me up, and I never took the bus at night again. Not that I needed to anyway, since the following semester, I ended up changing my schedule, and I went to school in the mornings. As for work, my dad would pick me up. Number 9. First off, I should start off by saying that I don't really know if this counts as a typical experience, but it's still one that has had me pretty nervous regardless. I live in a series of brand new homes that were just finished about a few months ago. Over the course of a month, I'd say, people have been slowly moving into the new homes. This neighborhood was about 20 minutes outside of the downtown, and it heads towards a wooded area. Near our neighborhood was a large field that featured a set of woods at the far end. So apart from seeing a few cars pass by every now and then, you rarely heard or saw anyone. Well, apart from the occasional neighbors, which, up to this point, there was only 2 others. I was living on my own at the time, and apart from having a small parrot, it was pretty quiet. So what do you know that on a random night, I start hearing laughter and singing outside my home. Now, of course, the first thing to expect would be the parrot, but these strange sounds would happen at around 3 in the morning. My parrot was sound asleep at the time, and I even tested it, because I would get up and stand near him, and he would be silent. Of course, the next idea was possibly my neighbor's, but when I ended up telling my neighbor about it, he had no idea what I was talking about. Actually, he's not even home at the time, since he works as a security guard at a shopping mall. My neighbor did, however, describe hearing knocking on his windows, and even the sounds of somebody whispering the previous evening. Next up was to talk to the other next door neighbor, Emily. She was pretty confused when I messaged her, and she says that she wasn't even home. She says she was still in the process of moving. So now it's obvious it was neither of my neighbors making the strange sounds. Fast forward to a couple of nights later. I ended up waking up to my parrot going crazy and making a bunch of noise. This time I check my phone and I see it's 1 in the morning. I walked on over and I could see my bird look really nervous about something. He was located right by the window, and of course, of all nights, I forgot to cover his home with a blanket. It just so happened that on this night too, I had chosen to forget to close the curtains. Something was telling me that he must have seen something through the window, and that's what caused him to act that way. I did my best to calm him down, but just like that, I was able to hear the distinct sound of knocking. The difference this time was it sounded like it had a rhythm to it. You can bet I called in about it, but after the house is checked out, there are no signs of anyone. A week later, I was staying over at a friend's house, and this time, my neighbor was home. He described hearing the strange laughter and knocking outside his windows, but by the time he went outside, all he saw was somebody running off into the field. It's now been a week since it started happening, and so far, nothing has come up. The strange noises haven't happened recently, so we would like to hope it's just some sort of joke. But still, knocking on people's windows and doors in the middle of the night, not exactly my definition of fun, that's for sure. Number 10. Back when I was 20 years old, me and my brothers were in a band and we used to travel all across the states, playing in small venues. Really, we were nothing too special, but we enjoyed what we were doing. Since we did travel so much, you can just imagine the hours of time we spent on the road, looking endlessly at nothing. Well, I recall one evening in particular where, of all times, our car was having issues. It turned out to be something with the engine, so we were forced to stop in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. Thankfully for us, somebody had seen us at the side of the road, and they offered to take us back to the nearby town. This is where we ended up staying for the evening while our car was getting fixed. I don't really remember the name of the town since this was like 10 years ago, but I do remember just how small it was. A small grocery store, this small motel we were staying at, and this garage our car was getting worked on. It's what consisted of this place. You can imagine that at nighttime, it got really dark. So much, actually, that the stars and moonlight were really the only proper source of light. Looking back, it was pretty interesting. Luckily for us, though, the mechanic was able to get our car fixed before 10 p.m., and we were finally able to get back on the road soon after. Or so you would think. You see, we were pretty tired from a long day of driving, and since our next show wasn't for a couple of days, we figured we could go ahead and relax here for the night. This is when things were about to get interesting. For some reason, I had trouble sleeping that night, and I ended up waking up at around 5 a.m. I was full of energy for some reason, and I couldn't wait to get back on the road. I remember getting up and taking a look out the window, but I could see what appeared to be movement outside our small tour van. Perhaps somebody just checking the car out? Not exactly when you're able to see them break one of the windows and proceed to open your car. I was now watching from our window as another vehicle pulled up and 2 more people stepped out. I watch as one by one they're taking instruments out and they're putting them in their car. I'll tell you, it didn't take a genius to realize what these guys were up to. But what was I going to do? There were 3 of them, and I was the only one awake. How do I know they didn't have anything on them? You never know. Also, if I do call for help, how long is it going to take for it to arrive? Well, I do end up calling for help, but by the time it arrives, it was already too late. I did give them a description and whatnot, but after all was said and done, they weren't found. Sadly, we didn't get our instruments back, but the mechanic was so nice to work on our car for free, and he even drove us to our next destination. As for the show, we did actually make it, and the band that went on before us let us borrow their instruments. So yes, that's our story. Welcome back. Looks like you made it to the end of the stories. So, now's the part where you tell me, which story was your favorite? Also, I've got a question for all of you. When do you listen to these stories, and what do you do? I know a lot of people like to listen to these when they're playing video games or even when they're relaxing, but it's always cool to hear from all of you. But yeah, let me know which story was your favorite. I'd love to hear it. And remember, if you want to see more or you want to catch up on any of the videos you might have missed, then make sure to check them out. There's honestly a great variety here, and I've got more awesome videos on the way. So one thing's for sure, you won't want to miss what's next. But until then, everyone, take care and have yourself an amazing day.